So really what we see now is that future lens and then the global perspective, and what I'd like to do myself is talk around the domestic sector, particularly focusing on the supermarket industry. By way of background, I worked in supermarkets. I came over from Sainsbury's. I think I was on the second boatload of Brits that invaded Coles back in 2005, and there's been, as Brett's laughing down the front, there's many more have come since. I've always worked in fresh produce. I left Coles in 2009. I've been working in an advisory consulting capacity with producers, growers, suppliers, supplying through to the majors, but also working with the majors themselves, particularly around the fresh foods sector. And look, the reason for talking about... I'm going to need to flick. This flicker isn't going to work, is it? Can I grab a... Great. So really, the question is, why are we talking about retailers? Why are we talking about supermarkets? It's really important to understand consumer motivations. In Australia, you've got the second most concentrated retail market in the world, after New Zealand. And essentially that can be a positive as well, because with 2 phone calls, you can access pretty much 60% of the market in Australia, which is phenomenal. But today we're preaching to the converted. Everyone in here is on board. The problem is you've got a lot of consumers out there who may not be. You've got a lot of retailers who perhaps don't understand. And in terms of helping us work with the retailers, it's important to understand their needs and ultimately consumer needs. So that really sets the context of the content for today. So the changing retail and consumer landscape, the growth tactics and the likely future state, where's it going to end up? And for those producers out there, what does it mean for them? Because change can also mean opportunity. So if we just start by looking at the grocery market in Australia, 10.5 million grocery consumers, 100,000 food and beverage outlets, which actually is pretty large for the population of Australia, but given the size of the country, obviously you're going to have more outlets. Retail 72% and food service 25%. Now if you break this down by channel, you get the usual suspects at the top of the majors here. Convenience, which huge number of stores, and then the specialists here. Takeout, dining out, institutional leisure, which is the hospitals, the schools, the prisons, and so on. And the real unknown space that is growing rapidly is obviously down here, is online, and Amazon is the one we'll be talking about this afternoon, because they're really sort of shaping up that space. But if you look at the majors, what's interesting is you take Woolworths as obviously the largest retailer in Australia, most dominant market share, has been for many, many years. Actually, only about 8% of consumers shop exclusively in Woolworths, which is very low. So the Australian consumer is quite a promiscuous consumer. They will switch between brands quite readily. And there's a number of reasons why that happens, which we'll go into. When we break down large retailers versus small retailers, this just looks at the last couple of years. No surprises. You've got a baseline here of 0. You've got the small retailers in red, which are basically in negative territory. They're losing out increasingly to the majors. So back in my day when I was...
Excuse me, that's annual growth.
Yes, that's growth, yeah, percentage growth. So back in my day at Coles, the attitude was we're all trading on the back of inflation. I was looking at Michelle, what are Woolworths doing? Woolworths are going, well, what are Coles doing? And ultimately, manufacturers are putting up prices. We're all a bit of inflation. We're putting up our prices. Consumer pays a bit more. We're all hitting a bonus at the end of the day. We'll go away, we're happy. Life was quite easy. That was the complacent duopoly. Then Aldi came along, and Aldi started to really mix things up. And that's what broken that duopoly up. And we'll see how that has played out, because it's really driven the major retailers to innovate, to think differently, to act differently. And that's why we're seeing this improved performance. No surprise in terms of market shares when you look at the dominance of Coles and Woolworths, still much bigger, and these guys growing significantly. Sometimes to look forwards, it's good to look backwards, and this just sort of sets a scene of the retail sector. You're probably seeing more competition in Australian retailing now than you have ever done in the past, certainly in the last 40 years. It's unprecedented. And it really comes down to the Darwinian principles of Aldi taking share of the independents, Coles then takes share of the independents, Aldi takes share of Coles and Woolworths, Coles takes it back off Woolworths, and really now Woolworths is just starting to come back. In the last sort of 8 months, they've just started to see some green shoots coming through. How long will that last? The only thing that could probably stop this is competition law. seems to be pretty ineffective. We've had a couple of grocery inquiries, didn't really achieve much. There's Section 46 provision obviously going through, which might make a difference in terms of competition between small retailers, but we'll have to see. When you monetize this, then you just take FY15 and 16 and you look at the sales transfer, and you can see where the dollars have moved around. There's two very clear winners, and that's Aldi and that's Coles, at the expense of these guys and obviously Metcash, with the, who own the IGA brand, that's been hugely impacted and is continuing to do so. So just going to take a very quick look at Woolworths and Coles and then just talk a little bit more about Aldi, because conscious Aldi opened up in June last year, and there's a pretty new business here, and I'm not sure how many people have seen Aldi, so we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So this is interesting. So for the last 7 years, last 27 quarters, you can see like-for-like growth here. Coles in the red, Woolworths in the blue. So essentially since 2009, Coles has been outgrowing Woolworths. Now, I remember being in Coles, I left in 2009, I remember there being this sort of attitude, it will never happen. It will never happen. There was, Coles will never turn it around. Wesfarmers came in, obviously bought Coles, paid a huge multiple. They brought in that proven ex-Asda guys. Asda was a very broken business in the UK, losing £1 million a day, 3 weeks from going under. The guys who did the turnaround on Asda then came into Coles under Archie Norman. So no surprise, hungry, incentivised, nothing's going to stop them. So really no surprise that this happened. Interesting now that Woolworths is coming back, leveraging scale advantage, better stores, better supply chains, and starting to get that growth back. But it's come at a huge cost. So you look at EBIT margins. Woolworths were making these crazy 8% margins, double the global average margins, not sustainable. You see now they've dropped to almost half that. So it's come at a huge, huge cost. And that value, that profit pool has been significantly reduced. When you look at Coles, Coles has taken a slightly different tactic. Coles drives the value message. It's all around value. It's the down. So they've gone down the email offerings, mass customization of targeted offerings. But then this. Australia didn't really have much of this until probably 4 or 5 years ago, which is the deep discounting, fewer, deeper, bolder promotions, half price. So really consumers now only switch on at a 40% discount, really. So it's massive deflation into the market. At the same time, you've seen this drive towards the Coles brand, the private label. Almost a third of Coles sales now come through private label, growing at 8.5% a year, and will continue to grow. But the sort of the own goal, I guess, Coles in a sense has become a victim of their own success. This down campaign basically said to consumers, low price is acceptable. And essentially that then destigmatized low price in the eyes of consumers, which basically said go and shop in Aldi because they're actually the owner of low price. So post-GFC, this tactic is actually backfired somewhat, and Coles are trying to combat it by trying to create this everyday value messaging, which is challenging. When you look at margins, it's not too different to the Woolies curve, peaking here, but now coming crashing down as competition's intensifying. It does say that the Coles as a business is very much sales focused. So they're reinvesting efficiencies and savings into lower prices to drive volume. And that's due to Aldi. So the deflation that Aldi's put into the market has driven this next wave of range reduction. So the major retailers, Woolies had about 25,000 SKUs, product lines. Coles had a similar number. Coles are now down to about 17,000 product lines and continuing to reduce. So they're targeting another 15% reduction. No different to what's happened in the UK market. Is to get more efficient, you need to have fewer lines. The problem for Coles is this. It's a bit of a busy slide, but basically it says that like-for-like sales growth is coming down. So you can see how this is crashing down. So they're putting more price, more investment into lower prices in order to get higher volume. They're not getting the higher volume anymore. So the whole economics of that strategy is starting to unwind, which means that in terms of margin extraction, the likelihood is that they're going to come back to the producers and further down the supply chain to squeeze the suppliers harder. As competition intensifies, the manufacturers, the producers will get squeezed harder. When we look at Aldi, how many people here have shopped in Aldi or been into an Aldi? That's pretty good, actually. Okay. That's good. It's probably over half the people here. So Aldi's a massive business, probably 4 to 5 times the size of Coles and Woolworths combined, 10,000 stores in 19 countries. The value proposition is really this, it's about smaller stores and convenience, essentially. 1,500 product lines compared to the 17 to 20,000 now in Coles and Woolworths. Top 20% of the lines that generate 80% of the sales. So they're just going for the core basket. At high quality private label. So on one hand, it's incredible that Aldi doesn't get sued more often for passing off, because you can see here that you got the Aldi brand versus the main national brand equivalent, and it is incredibly similar. How they get away with that, I've got no idea. But my point is not so much that, it's about this. It's that Aldi's one of the biggest sellers of cosmetics and nappies in the country, and in fact in the world. And when you look at private label, generally any products that have high intimacy, you put it in your body, on your baby, you don't trust a retailer brand because it may not be good as a national brand. But the fact Aldi is so dominant in these sectors essentially says consumers do trust the Aldi brand. It's incredible. And this probably summarizes the next part of their value proposition. So Aldi plays on that sort of secret German giant mentality. They come out with sort of quite alternative marketing campaigns, and I'm sure Jeff might have a comment on this later, but this campaign ran for about 7 years, and it ran around the world, massively successful. They've only just recently, in the last sort of 12 months or so, changed, but it just said, light brands only cheaper. So when consumers go around Aldi, they really get an aggregation of cost savings. That's how consumers perceive Aldi, good value. In terms of their model, thought to be about 9% lower cost of doing business. So, obviously it's a private company, so you don't get much transparency of their results, but significantly lower. And, we've talked about the smaller stores, core product range, and high quality products, but Aldi's amazing. It's that Germanic mentality. It's the 2%ers. They just take a little bit from here, sum it together. It's significant savings. So they have this cookie cutter layout, flexible staff, fewer staff, lower rent, smaller stores, so less rent, lower maintenance. Pretty obvious. If you want, just-in-time deliveries, they're not carrying stock, daily clearable DC, distribution centres, no promotions. If you want something, you've got to pay for it. And then all of this is the 2%ers, slightly longer barcodes, so they scan a little bit quicker, a little bit more easily over the checkout. Don't spend much on marketing. Shelf-ready, one-touch packaging like here. It doesn't need to be decanted and manually handled. It's that real simple. For Aldi, it's got to be simple. Great supplier relations. Suppliers really like working with Aldi. So with Coles and Woolworths, you tend to get a lot of taxes, shall we say, which is, trading terms, rebates, ullage, wastage allowance, et cetera, et cetera. There's probably a load more, Brett, but a load more. But Aldi, what's the cost price? Give me the cost price, that's it. If I say I'm going to take 10,000, I'll take 10,000. They don't change the orders on you. So suppliers like working with Aldi. And then finally, shorter opening hours. So that obviously has implications in terms of labour. And that's probably the largest single operating cost of supermarkets. Labour is about 10 to 12% of sales. So, they do capture a huge amount of efficiencies. And then the question you often get is, you'd have all gone down that centre aisle in Aldi and you've gone, why do they sell weird stuff? Because they do sell really, really weird stuff. But this is one of the cleverest strategies about Aldi. So, essentially, grocery shopping is pretty dull. And they're making it exciting. You don't know what you're going to get. You've got this fear of missing out. They're the biggest seller of ski gear in the world now. Would you believe it? You get the novelty and surprise. You get this sort of random viral marketing, and you get these Aldiphiles, passionate Aldi people who just keep telling you about how I just got the best deal in Aldi. You've got to go to Aldi. What's more convincing than your friend or family telling you, go and shop in Aldi? It's worth millions in terms of marketing. And what Aldi gets is they get the efficiencies of holding low inventory, but they create a perception in consumers' eyes that they have a wide range. They don't. They only have about 1,500 products. But they create a perception that they've probably got 20 to 30,000 products. And I was looking back at my house and saying, well, what crazy things have I bought in Aldi? And I bought this. So this is my two girls. I went into Aldi just to have a look, and I ended up coming out with a skeleton for $50. It's $49.99. I bought a skeleton. My girl's doing brain surgery here, and my wife's a physio. And I said to her, look, and I phoned her and I said, I'm going to buy this skeleton. It looks awesome. And she says, you're nuts, but don't buy it. But I bought it anyway. Took it home, and she said, look, I'll look at it, and if it's anatomically correct, you can keep it because it's educational. If it's not, you send it back. And it has all the nerves and everything. It was great. I kept it. So, I would not have ever intended to buy a skeleton in Aldi, is my point. So when you look at their expansion, they're growing phenomenally since their entry in 2001. They're going to be 11 billion of sales. They're probably about 8 billion of sales now, growing 15% year on year. In terms of the potential in Australia, probably about 930 stores based on catchments of about 20,000 people, which is about 17% market share, and they're probably around that 8 or 9% now. But what's most worrying for the majors is this. Year after year, this is the amount of sales they're taking off each of these other retailers. $1 billion of sales are coming out of the market and flowing to Aldi every year. It's phenomenal. So basically the message with Aldi is wherever they have entered anywhere in the world, essentially growth is lower and margins are squeezed. So on to Metcash. You've probably, WA and SA are very dominant in terms of independence. You overtrade, you have about 30 to 35% market share. Obviously, the entry of Aldi is having an impact. It's had a greater impact in South Australia. It's probably starting to bite a little bit here. But when you look at what the impact of Metcash, it's been pretty significant. I mean, even up to 2016, and this is mainly East Coast driven, their EBIT is hard. Sales of 9 to 10 billion. But essentially profit is down 50%. 2%, you probably get more for your money putting it in a bank than putting it into Metcash. So quite worrying. So in terms of people saying, is Australia in a price war? Well, when you've got the price competition that we do, when we've got deflation as we do, it may not quite yet be, an irrational promotional intensity aimed at winning market share, but it's not far from it. It's not far from it. And you only have to look at the UK sector to see what's happening. We've got Aldi, they've reset the dial in terms of value. You've got Coles maintaining focus on lower prices. Basically coming out the front page of the Fin Review saying, to keep Coles the enforcer to keep the squeeze on suppliers and prices. They're not shying away from that. And it's hard for the ACCC to say, well, Coles say to the ACCC, well, you don't want me to give consumers lower prices. You want me to put prices up. It's a clever strategy. Woolworths investing $1 billion in the last year. Metcash invested 3% in lower prices. We've got too much floor space, retail floor space in Australia. Per capita floor space is going back. That's eroding profitability. So essentially, the pin's been pulled. And when we go into this price war, it's essentially the retailer loses, supplier loses, and the customer wins. And there's an argument to say, look, prices are too expensive in Australia. When you compare it to global prices, it is quite expensive, and that's probably the years of built-up inflation. But essentially, it's going to be some pain coming along. And look at the UK. Over 4 years, retailer margins dropped by 50%. Why would Australia be any different? And then on top of that, you have this. You have the Schwartz Group that run Lidl, the main competitor to Aldi internationally, who are now opening a new brand called Kaufland. This is a big box hard discounter. But essentially, it's going to be more competition into Australia. And then on top of that, you've got these guys coming. And Jeff Bezos, the founder and CEO of Amazon, who says, your margin is our opportunity. It's pretty bloody frightening. So just going to talk now a little bit about, just sort of sets the scene in terms of sort of where the retail space is at the moment. Just want to talk about the consumer sector now. So look, key drivers. Nothing new. Some stuff we've heard for the last 10 years. And, the single households, the online and so on. What we are seeing, though, is that consumers are increasingly becoming more polarised towards either the budget end, playing to Aldi, or the more premium end, going to, the premium independents, perhaps. And, think of yourselves as consumers. You might well go and say, well, for my drudge items, my toilet paper, washing powder, etc., I'm happy to go shopping at Coles and Woolworths and Aldi. But you know what? For fresh foods, I might go to a premium independent. I might get my meat, my produce, and some. So you can see how people are just being pulled apart. For the majors, that's quite worrying because they trade on that middle consumer. So you can see how they're coming under pressure. Can you relate to this as your family meal times and you used to sit around and have dinner together? No one's nodding their head, so it's completely right. It's not. It's like this. It's we're on our smartphones, usually getting told off for doing it. But meal times are very differently now. It's multiple meals. Kids eat earlier, parents eat later, perhaps. You're doing something else at the same time. There's no dessert. Dessert is it's an ice cream, it's a yogurt, it's a bit of fruit. There's no bread and butter pudding and how it may have been, depending on your age. 30, 40 years ago. And consumer shopping behaviour is changing. It's less of the full shops, which make up about 30%, more of the top-up, smaller, more regular. So, more trips, 5 to 7 trips per week. Basket sizes are smaller. 80% of basket sizes are now below $50 and decreasing. And you're also seeing that the shopping occasion is different. The Monday to Thursday shop is quite different to the Friday to Sunday shop, when you might be having a dinner party, more indulgent foods. So it's becoming more polarised. At the same time, you've got consumers who are balancing the value in terms of form and function versus the values of provenance and sustainability and so on. And there's always that dilemma when consumers, purchase things of, what do I want? And it's not always rational. You can put this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic requirement for food safety at the bottom, and every retailer in the world has one of these, and it's various iterations of this. But you can see how this is playing out. Food safety at the bottom, non-negotiable. Animal welfare moving up to ethics at the top. And you can see Australia now is really pushing ethics with SEDEX and those types of increased auditing requirements for producers to ensure they're using labour appropriately. But essentially, consumers are never going to back away from food safety, and you have these incidents. We had the frozen berry incidents, transparency. They want more and more transparency. They don't trust anybody. They don't trust a retailer. They don't trust a producer. They don't trust a farmer. So transparency is key. At the same time, you had issues in Frontiera in New Zealand with the sabotage of putting pesticide into the milk. We've had Horsegate in the UK. This was 3 years ago now. Where horse meat got into the beef supply chain, and it was essentially because Tesco's were putting, major retailers in the UK, I should say all of them were, putting massive pressure onto their producers to get lower costs. It just wasn't sustainable anymore. But the impact was huge. So, so hungry you could eat a horse, we've got you covered, Tesco's. That kind of campaign came out. There were viral YouTube videos of students running down dressed as pantomime horses down the aisles of Tesco's, down the meat aisle, shouting, "Mummy, mummy, where are you?" Those sorts of things went viral. And as much as those retailers to shut it down, they couldn't shut it down. It had massive brand impact. At the same time here, this is just I just googled this on to say put in food fraud, and this is what comes up. Hoyt's oregano was found by choice to contain 11% oregano leaves. 11%. And there is tons of this happening. You think it's happening in China. It's not. It's happening here. In biosecurity, this is another massive concern for food security. Bananas, 90% of our bananas come from Innisfail and Tully, and they've got Panama TR4 on 2 farms. Now, in most countries where that's broken out, within 2 to 4 years, they've only had 50% of production. Within 6 to 8 years, they've had no production. So this is hugely, hugely important to our industry. And this is just some pictures from a farm I went on to last year. All the extra costs. You've got to wash your car, wash the trucks, wash your feet before you go in. Huge cost. And it's probably not going to be enough to stop it from taking over. And then this, I think this, I hope you all saw it. I thought it was a fantastic program, just educating the consumer about the war on waste and the campaign about ban the bag. As soon as this came out, I think within a week, both Coles and Woolworths said we're going to ban the bag in all states. This drives change. Costa, you're nodding there. This absolutely drives change. Prior to that, we even saw this, Harris Farms with imperfect pigs, Woolworths with the odd bunch, slightly cosmetically blemished fruit, saying we shouldn't be chucking this away. But at the same time, the retailer's going, well, hang on a sec, if people are buying this, maybe I'm going to be cannibalising my sales of my top tier product. That means my margins are going down. How do I manage that? And that's where the help of industry and producers need to come on board. So how do we make the economics still work for you as retailers and the consumer, but we do the right thing? Local, local is a massive issue that all the retailers are pushing heavily. And local means different things to different people. So, here's a few examples about, it tells a story, it's keeping in touch with seasons. It means different things to different people, but local is really important. And we're so far from where we need to be given Australia is the size that it is. And then this nutritional confusion. 30% of people confused, paleo diets. And it's almost now you can need a sample size of 1 and you're a nutritional expert and you'll have followers and you have bloggers and, it's crazy. But unfortunately, it does mean consumers don't know what to do. And I think it's really saying that consumers ultimately want traditional food values, but they want also the modern food benefits. So the traditional food values are the emotional comfort, the provenance, the taste, and so on, with the benefits of, functional satisfaction, of long shelf life, affordability, and so on. But what we've really seen is this pendulum has swung too far, and it's possibly the major manufacturers that have driven this, that people think of food now as it's messed about with. It's over-processed, its shelf life's too long. I was doing some work with a meat retailing business, and interestingly, as soon as you start to retail meat too cheap, what happens? People stop buying it. They don't trust it, which is quite counterintuitive. So really where we probably need to be is around maximising the realness of food, the seasonality, the locality, etc. But reflect those functional needs of storage and preparation and also affordability. But increasingly now we're seeing that consumers are also saying, I want it to be produced by a business that does the right thing. And this is this movement around conscious capitalism, and this is a photo, from the working poor in the US at Four Corners, a great program on it, where they just can't afford to live anymore, and you're getting this polarization. And essentially, it's saying that as a society, we're moving from a wants-based society to more of a needs-based society, consuming more of what we have and making more from what we have. So, I might want a new car, but I don't need a new car. It's not the right thing to do. And consumers are now challenging business in this regard. So when you get programs like this on Four Corners of the 7-Eleven investigation of ripping off workers and supermarkets found to be exploiting and with slave-like conditions found on their farms, it's not good for our industry. It's not good. And then the next one we're seeing now is radical openness, being transparent about business operations and values. And I think the best example of a business that's taken its head on is McDonald's. Now, you can see we've all had the photo of the overweight kid here, but essentially when this kind of advertising came out and he said, is it acceptable as a society for McDonald's to be taking our kids from looking like this to looking like that in 3 months? And obviously that's not true, but that's the sort of messaging that went out. But McDonald's had two options. One is to sort of forget about it and sort of push it under the carpet, or to take it head on. And credit on them, they took it head on. They created this McDonald's Gets Grilled, and they said, we'll answer any question you have. We'll have full transparency. And they did a lot of work on their supply chain prior to this as well, obviously. But then you can, people can email questions in, and you get all sorts of questions coming in. Is it true your burger's made from pink slime, to is there tertiary butyl hydroquinone or something similar to that in your food? So you're getting some quite range of questions coming in. So credit to McDonald's for taking that on. So what are the likely growth tactics of the retailers moving forward? Taking all those consumer concerns, and retailers are always focused on understanding consumers first. So we're going to say the real battleground around this, it's food to go versus cook at home, online bricks and mortar, full service top up. No surprises. And you can see how the new entrants are playing to these elements. So when you ask consumers what's the most important aspect of grocery shopping, depending on the retailer brand, it will be a blend of these: quality, availability, price. If you're Aldi, you're probably going to be focused a bit more here and perhaps a little bit less on the other two. But essentially, it's a mix of all of those. That's what retailing essentially is about. There's 7 things that the retailers are really going to be driving in Australia. One is this: private label. Australia, second most concentrated market in the world. Private label penetration is very strongly correlated with retailer concentration. The more concentrated the market, the greater the propensity for private label. Australia's a massive outlier. It should have private label way higher. It should be up around the 40% mark. Now, the reason it's not is because it's been done so badly by the retailers over many, many iterations, so the consumer trust is low. But this being fixed, and we're going to see private label grow. Now, when private label grows, this is what happens. This is an example from Germany, 1999 to 2005, which is a similar time to where we are now. Private label growth, 50%. Number one brand leader went back 8%. And you can see the decline. Number of brands, 4 and 5, don't exist. So you will see this range rationalisation and this move to private label, and the velocity of that will increase. What we'll see is the bigger brands are getting squeezed. So, you've got the independents, the Maggie Beers here, and you've got the Coles private label here. You're getting declining margins, you're getting less brand loyalty, less space, less share, because of all the costs here. What's actually happening is this. The major manufacturers are then re-engineering their products, but reducing to take cost out, to reduce quality, downsize. We've seen Cadbury's do it with their chocolate, increasing additives, cheaper substitutes. All that does, it just flows back to the other two. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's crazy. But unfortunately, that's a short-termism that a lot of these manufacturers, in particularly the listed manufacturers. This is an example from, I live in Melbourne, my Coles Port Melbourne store. This is the tuna fixture, 4 bays, as you can see. 2 major manufacturers, John West and Greenseas. What percentage of the range is Greenseas? Do you think? Give me a number. 40? Anyone else? 25? It's 0. 2013, Coles said, Simplot, Heinz, both your brands, they're exactly the same to the consumer. There's no differentiation. We don't need both of you. Sealed bids, margins, best price forward, winner takes it all. Heinz lost, Simplot won. Simplot would have given away a lot of money that they won it. Now, what will happen over time is you can see this is all the Coles private label. That will increase. This is John West. That's Serena top tier. In probably another 18 months, there probably won't be 1 bay there, and these two will be sharing half a bay. And private label, small pack, big pack, flavour variants, brine, salt, chili, whatever you want, it's there. So every need will be satisfied by private label. So it's less range, more choice. That's the way it's going. It starts in grocery, then it flows across to fresh foods. Affordability. 40% of families in Australia only have $150 a week to spend on food. It's $1.70, $1.80 per person per meal, and 45 minutes to do that shop. We're seeing the increased use of this kind of activity of shopping on promotion, discounts. And ultimately that means that as value sensitivity increases, you're seeing brand loyalty goes down. That's brand loyalty to the retailer brand, but it's also brand loyalty to the national brand. So you can see how that's playing out. Promotions. Australia is like junkies. The retailers are junkies, the consumers are junkies. 40% of all products sold in the supermarket store goes through on promotion. The only country higher, at 60%, is New Zealand, which is a far more price-sensitive market. But this is really dangerous because it's got to be unwound. It's not sustainable. Discounting is good for short-term share, but if you don't have proper profitability, you basically get this impact in terms of innovation. You don't get the wave of innovation coming through because it's short-termism and it's cost-saving. Loyalty is something that's talked about as an absolute furphy, really, because half of Woolies customers are, you go to the checkout and you say, have you got your Woolies loyalty card? And you go, yeah, which one do you want? I got 8 of them. How is that loyalty? It's not. So you're seeing that loyalty is meaning different things. You can argue loyalty that is a function of location, range, price, and experience. But loyalty actually really just means we're in this together. Think of those brands of Harley Davidson, Apple. I've got an Apple computer, and even when Apple do something wrong, I still forgive them because I'm so loyal to the brand. That's what loyalty is about. So for the majors, loyalty is really around collecting data to better understand consumers. I want to get your data. I want to know what you want. I want to know what you want before you know you want it. That's what Amazon does. Aldi, Costco, they probably say, well, we don't need a loyalty card. We're everyday low price. You're going to get a deal every day you come and shop with us. And for the independents, it's probably about saying we're relevant to the local community. We contribute to society more than the majors do. And you look what the majors have done, the war for fresh. Fresh foods is where it is at because there's so much. Grocery is really saturated in terms of share for the majors. The opportunity now is about fresh foods. And they're doing a really good job. This is just the mango fixtures, multiple varieties, bulk displays, education here, product education, multiple varieties at different price points and different promotional mechanics. It's quite incredible. And the reason is that consumers who buy fresh, their basket size is 2.5 times bigger, or 2.4 times bigger. If you have just one fresh item, you spend 45% more. And amazingly, 40% of Coles consumers do not buy fresh. So they walk in the store, they go past fresh foods, they go past produce, meat, bakery, 15, great, and they don't engage. Online, Australia is actually pretty low in terms of online as a percentage of total retail sales. We generally track from a consumer and product perspective, we track very similarly to the UK on most things. And on supply chain aspects, we're probably more similar to the US and Canada. But you can see here that it's 7.5% versus, the UK at 14.9, and and China's obviously a lot higher. But you'd expect us to be more up around this range here. Now, when it comes to online, we're not going to go down the route of perhaps where Korea is. This is just someone scanning what they're going to buy and then jumping on the train that's just coming in behind, and then hopefully by the time they get home, the food's been delivered to them. It's not. I don't see online playing out to that extent in Australia, but these sorts of vehicles absolutely will. So this is who's used Hellofresh as a business, home delivery, Hellofresh. Maybe because they're not in WA. I don't know. I'm just guessing. If no one's used them, maybe you're not in WA. I don't know. Should have done. Yeah, just arrived. Okay, it's just arrived. Should have researched that before I asked the question. So look, Hellofresh is pretty mainstream over the East Coast now, and they will, for $69 for a meal for three, they'll deliver all these ingredients. It's all pre-packed. It's exactly the right amounts. You've got a little recipe card here where it will tell you what to do. If you've got teenage kids, you basically chuck them in a box and you say, right, dinner, 40 minutes, please, and they get on and do it. That's what some of my friends are doing. But it's not a small business. It's a massive business. So launched in 2011. It's in 7 countries. It's valued, it floated at over 3 billion Australian dollars. So they're massive, massive businesses. And you've got Aussie farmers and these other businesses coming along as well. Now, when you look across Europe, these sorts of opportunities are really taking hold. So as producers, a lot of producers have not engaged in this sector still, and it's one to really get onto. So what's the likely future state and opportunities for producers in Australia? When we look at the global EBIT retailer margins, Australia still has very fat profits in terms of Coles and Woolworths compared to the global average of 3.9%. And only Whole Foods, which I'll be talking about later, which is a premium top-end American firm that Amazon have just bought. You can see there's a huge amount of profitability in Australia still. And that's why you got retailers coming to Australia, because the margins are big. When you look at the UK and you see the rise of Aldi and Lidl, and this is, this is to 2015, but you could play this out and they've gone up. You can see a number of things. That cross-shopping is increasing. So 92% of consumers that shop in a Lidl or an Aldi also shop in one of the big 4, Tesco's, Sainsbury's, Morrison's or Asda. So huge cross-shopping, low brand loyalty. But the discounters, interestingly, whilst they're very much focused on value, they're actually now growing 30% year on year in terms of their premium food offering. So Lidl, which is very similar to Aldi, is essentially the largest seller of lobster in the country, yet they're a hard discounter. And they sell, and they're the biggest seller of champagne as well. So you can really see how they are taking the retail sector by storm. But ultimately, it's meaning that everyone exposed to supermarkets is making less money. And there was an interesting study in New Zealand that was done that they modelled it on bread. When bread went to an everyday low price strategy where they had $1 per loaf bread, for every 1% market share that the hard discounters take, it takes about 600 million of turnover out of that sector. So for the major manufacturers who run maybe high-low strategies where people pantry fill, and yes, it's not right, but some of that will go to waste. You can see by moving to a hard discounters taking more share will ultimately mean the value of individual categories will start to shrink. So growth will become even harder. And that's a real challenge, and that's what's caused a lot of problems in the UK where Aldi and Lidl have been very dominant. When you look at Australia, and this is a picture of Bilo in Australia, people say, well, Aldi's, it's only been in 2001, it's only Aldi, yeah, we've got Costco, but they're small, they're only 10 stores, and they're 1.5% market share, it's a bit small, don't worry about it. It's interesting to see what's happened in the hard discounters, because Australia is actually quite a price-sensitive market. Consumers are quite price-sensitive. And you can see this on this graph, that go back to 91, and you look at the discounters market share, it's really pretty high at 24%. And you can see, this is Morgan Stanley data, you can see how they're playing it out, that it's it's forecast to rise. And you ask, now, why did this happen? And you had these guys, you had Coles and Woolworths who basically bought up all the hard discounters and shut them down because they were deflating the market. Now, the ACCC should never have let that happen. That's why we've had this complacent duopoly that has basically profiteered on the back of manufacturers. You know, why in Australia have we got some of the highest retailer margins in the world when we've got a small population and a large geography and the cost of doing business is actually pretty expensive? You know, why was Woolworths able to make 8% EBIT? Shouldn't have been allowed. The ACCC should have stopped it. Taking this no one from the ACCC here. So look, what it really means is Australia is transitioning back to a grocery landscape that favours discounters. It's going to be driven by the higher retail margins and the higher labour costs. So we're going to see this move back. And you as consumers, it'll be interesting to see how you perceive it yourselves, that you're going to start to engage more with that hard discounter channel. You know, in a broader context, in terms of what we're talking about today, it's so important to be cognizant of these sorts of things, because ultimately, if we want to create change, we have to bring the consumer with us. We can't be a full step ahead. We've got to be that half step ahead. We've got to bring them along. So we need to work with our majors to achieve that. But unfortunately for producers, it does mean a bit more down, because, you know, these guys are going to continue to get squeezed in terms of, you know, price pressure, prices going down from one side, and then on the other side with, you know, fertilizer inputs, chemical inputs, seed companies, etc., costs are going up. And unfortunately, food in Australia is too cheap. Consumers do not value it. I'm sure, you know, Julian, you've got data there about how much, as a percentage of disposable income, consumers spend today on food versus 20 years ago. I would argue. Yeah. 30% down to 9%. So, you know, no surprise these guys are going to get squeezed. Now, what's interesting is the retailers have started to see that to get growth is becoming harder and harder. So they have to leverage capital and basically share risk and reward in order to get that growth. So Coles have got a nurture fund, $15 million a year spent on nurturing farm businesses, actually using their capital, investing with businesses. There's mango farms, there's berry farms. An investment they made that Julian talked about was Sundrop Farms, you know, high tech. There's been some challenges with it, but, you know, they've invested with a 10-year deal. Murray Goulburn would be another example. Didn't work out so well for Murray Goulburn, but it's the symbolically it's saying long-term intent. And, you know, opportunities like this, where this is from Europe, where there's biodigesters, which, you know, are basically, you know, consuming, you know, feed and waste materials, turning it into energy. Energy can be put into here in terms of heating, but also the waste CO2 can be ploughed in, and you can get elevated growth rates. You get increased cycle stock turns in terms of growing product more quickly. And it's, you know, it's fairly condensed, and it's a sort of concept that might work in regard to what we're talking about today. But what does it mean in terms of the future for producers? Essentially, the pressure on cost is not going to go away. So, you know, the need to invest in efficiency and essentially do the basics well is paramount. Producers are up against some of the most skilled buyers in the world. You know, Coles has done a brain drain globally of buying talent. So if you're up against really good buyers who are heavily invested in terms of negotiation training and so on, you need to be good yourself. You've got to back yourself. You've got to have the smarts yourself. You've got to have the global consumer insights. I remember being a buyer, and I looked after the in national office with the salads and vegetables buying team. So I had 26 buyers and, you know, 500 suppliers and 50 categories, whatever it was. And I'll have a tomato supplier come up and say, what do you think our tomato strategy should be? And I was going, bloody hell, I've got all of this, and I'm managing store operations and marketing and logistics, and you're supplying one product to me. You should be the expert. You tell me what my strategy is. Don't expect me to tell you. I expect you to travel the world, have all the consumer insights, take my sales data, analyze it, interpret it, tell me what I need to do to sell more, help me to help you. But producers, and you see this in some of the more mature agricultural sectors in Australia, take apples. Growers are still growing red delicious apples. Why? Consumers don't want them. In America now, you have 14 months supply of red delicious apples because they can't get through it in the year. Why are you growing it? So there needs to be that accountability that producers grow what consumers want. It has to be consumer back. And too often that doesn't happen. In terms of strategic alliances, there is good opportunities. Whilst the retailers get a bad name, if you have a product, you have an idea, and you can engage in the right way, there is good opportunities with the retailers. They can be on the same page as you. Diversifying, not being single point sensitive, exporting food service online, etc., and mindset. It all comes down to relationships, and relationships hinge on trust and respect. And often good businesses will work with good businesses. So that is really the position we should be in. So in summary, it's going to get a lot tougher probably. The focus on price isn't going to go away. It's important to put the consumer first and embrace the change. And, there's so much, big data is such an advantage today. There's so much more data that can help us make better decisions, more informed decisions. Part of what today is about is making more informed decisions. And finally, about being different, innovating and adding value across everything we do. We heard from Julian to say, well, there's so many ideas out there. How do you raise the capital? How do you do that? How do you get the skill set? How do you get the technical people you need to run those businesses to come into it? That is the overview today. Thank you for your time.